Learning licks, good or bad? What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I'm DeMarius Jackson. So I'll be the first person to tell you that there's really no, at least in my opinion, straight path to learning how to improvise. Coming from a background of playing mostly classical music early in life and then learning different woodwind instruments, just honestly because I have a love of playing in musical theater and pit orchestras and woodwind doubling, as we call it, my personal path of learning how to improvise music has been all over the place. And it's honestly something that will continue for the rest of my life. And in all honesty, it's probably a little bit contradictory to a lot of the videos that I post here, a lot of the lick videos. While I do love learning licks and learning things from different people's solos, I also love transcribing whole solos, I also love learning theory and playing my horn, all the technical aspects that are involved with that. So with that in mind, I've compiled a couple of interviews from master classes and whatnot of different musicians out there. And I highly encourage you to watch the entire video. I'll leave the link down below to the clip so you can get a little perspective of what was actually said and kind of what they meant. But anyway, without further ado, I encourage you to watch these clips. Leave your comments down below of how you went about or how you're going about learning jazz, and hopefully we can open up the floor of discussion to help all the musicians out there, including myself. So without further ado, please enjoy.
You might not remember this, but when you were a kid, your way of communicating for the first 2 years of your life resembled your parents. You listened to them speak, you even told their jokes, you picked up on the language. And jazz is the same way. I'll give you an example. There's a great bass player named Paul Chambers, and he had a lick that went like this. So I learned that lick. And then the next thing you know, I listened to Ray Brown, and he had a lick that went like this. But then I had to figure out how to make those licks my lick. So here's my taking those two guys' licks and making my lick. Don't be afraid to imitate, because here's the thing. Can you imagine if I told you that you can't say anything unless you come up with original idea? How far do you think you would get in our conversation? Not very far. So music, jazz particularly, is the same way. You have to steal the master's licks and make them your own.
You know, as I said, I learned solos. For me, the trick was I played as much as I could. I played along with records, you know, and I spent a lot of time wasting time. In a certain way, practicing. I have a bizarre, there's no system, I have no system. I just sit around and get something in my head and then work on it for a while. And then maybe the next day, if I was lucky, I'd work on it, you know. And somehow it would sneak into my playing. I tried to practice things that are going to be practical. Certain licks, I was talking about earlier, certain licks or certain phrases only sound good in certain keys. I'll learn them in every key, you know, just to know it, but I have to stay aware that I'm really not going to play a certain thing down at the bottom of the horn because it sounds like crud, you know.
I was going to say, yeah, I mean about, you know, using other people's styles, you know. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously, if you haven't really checked out Sonny Rollins and you're a saxophone player, you know, you should do so, first of all. And what I found, you know, is like I would be playing and I would just be trying to play like me and not really think about it. And I'd just start playing stuff that Sonny might do, but not as good because I'm not Sonny, you know. But that's a part of it. I mean, you kind of have to go through all of that. But I think it's important not to get stuck on that either. You know?
So, if I ask you to pick a lick out of a Coltrane solo and ask you to pick a lick out of a Coltrane solo, chances are you're both going to pick different ones because different things appeal to different people. You dig? So and you can't learn all the vocabulary. So my rule for vocabulary learning is practice what you like. Because part of the process of learning vocabulary is to develop your own personal style. Because you can't copy everything, life isn't long enough, so you have to be selective. And what is the selective process? An intuitive, emotional process.
Well, I liken it to learning another language. You know, if you're going to learn French, the main thing is you have to learn pronunciation, you have to learn vocabulary, and you have to learn grammar, word usage. And that's the very fundamental core of learning French. But you're still not speaking French until you start to visit those countries and start to pick up dialects, start to pick up colloquialisms, you know what I mean? And that's listening to the records.
And I was listening, when I was listening to Charlie Parker, I was thinking, wow, that's a really, really high form of self-expression. And how on earth did he come up with that, you know? And of course, one big step to figuring out how he might have come up with that is to be able to figure out what the notes are. Without that, you know, yeah, you're going to have a very hard time understanding. But that's really only one step in it. I mean, the real thing, it always seemed to me, was to understand why he chose those notes and why they work, you know? And that's how I always approached it. So again, I think that was a way of bridging that gap, or actually just not having a gap, because that's where I was going with it, you know.
So when you're going to check out these musicians or any other musician, what do you do to study them?
I just transcribe them. Yeah. So how do I transcribe them? Or I haven't done transcribing much in many years, but at one point I did a lot of it. So I actually started doing it a little bit more recently again. I kind of didn't transcribe for maybe 10 years. But when I was in college, and maybe the first 5 years or so afterwards, I think maybe the last solo I transcribed was probably maybe 95 or something like that. But basically I just transcribed just by ear. You know, I just put on at that time, the tape or the record, and just write it down. That's it. And then I'd play with the record, you know, first reading it, and then eventually without the music, just memorized. And I used to, when I was in college, and actually after college, I pretty much played only solos. I didn't know any scale patterns or anything. I kind of played a little bit, but I just played solos pretty much every day. I just played them. So maybe I'd have a few solos I was doing at one time, and I'd just play those over and over again for months. That's basically it.
You have to know what's good for you. Like how you practice might not be good for this person or that person. So you can't compare just because, well, Chris Potter practiced this way, so this must be the way. He studied with this teacher, so this is the guy I have to study with. It's not about that. It's how you connect with anything or anybody. So some of the best teachers I've had, you'll never hear about them. They're great players in Des Moines, Iowa, and the things that they taught me was just amazing. And so you can learn. It's not about going to a certain place or having the money to study with this. It's really how you take in that information from anybody. So
transcribing is another thing. You guys do a lot of transcriptions and stuff like that. For those of you that do them, they're really helpful. It's like reading books. It really is reading books, but at a whole nother level. It's like reading books as the guy is telling you the story and you're writing it down. But not everything that's in a transcription is really important. They're great solos. For example, I love Coltrane solo on Like Someone in Love. If you look at that transcription, it's a map. And it's a map of how you build a perfect solo. I mean, it literally is a drawing, you know. So in that respect, yeah, that everything about that transcription is important because I'm looking at it as the whole. But every line and every phrase isn't necessarily what I want. And some solos, you only really need one particular thing. You're only looking for one really cool sound that they used.
You know, there's so many different ways to play that we forget sometimes what our music is. You know, we forget that it is an individual opportunity to play what we feel. And we spend so much time trying to play like somebody else, trying to get somebody else's stuff together, that we don't even know how we feel. You know, once you learn the chord scales, once you learn the chords, then you have a choice. Of course you have people that you like to hear. You know, I grew up listening to Coltrane. I love Coltrane. I grew up listening to Wayne Shorter. I grew up listening to all of these great, great players. But at a certain point in your life, you come to a thing where you say, well, yeah, I know what he does. I understand what he does. Now, what do I think about this thing? How do I feel? How do I feel about this thing? And then that's when you create your voice. That's when you step out and you become who you are. You know,
the thing about jazz improvisation, there's so many different ways to approach improvising.